Good morning, everyone. Welcome at ERA 2024 webinar on the results and also ERA 2025 webinar on preliminary assumptions and input data we have consolidated. I'm very pleased to welcome you in this webinar, and I would suggest just to wait 1 or maximum 2 minutes for last participants to join, and then we could begin this webinar. So thank you very much for your patience. Okay, I suggest that we begin. For today, I have an honor to moderate this webinar. My name is Lukas Galdikas. I'm ERA 2024 project manager, and I will also continue working with ERA 2025. So I will be also very eager to engage with you in the future. However, for today, we can focus mainly on ERA 2024 results and also take a look at what data we have consolidated for ERA 2025. And in this journey, I have a few colleagues joining and who will lead you through this presentation. And I could begin with our steering group convener, Ralph. So he will actually begin and introduce himself very soon. But alongside of him, we also have Gregorio joining. And Aaron, who will especially support the presentations of ERA 2025 consolidated input data and the assumptions which we have prepared. Without further ado, I will go quickly through some housekeeping nuances. Here, I would emphasize that actually this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be published as well, so just be aware of this. Meanwhile, to engage with us and share your comments or questions, please use Slido application. You will see connection codes throughout the presentation, as well as I saw Pia already shared a link for you to connect. So please do connect and share your questions throughout the presentation. Also, please vote, be active, vote for the most interesting questions which you find so that we can tackle them also because this will help us also to focus on the most relevant questions, because the time might be limited to go through all of them. If that would be the case, at least we want to cope with the most interesting questions for you. So please do express your preferences. Meanwhile, any chat or hand-raising features within the Teams environment is disabled, and we will not rely on this. So please do engage through Slido application completely, just to make sure that we don't miss your questions. Again, if you need to come back to this presentation after the webinar will finish, give some time to us. The recording and the presentation itself should be published within a day or maximum 2. So thank you very much for listening to me on this. Here are the codes which I mentioned to you. Since we have 2 separate topics, rather on ERA 2024 results and ERA 2025 input data, we have 2 separate links for you to provide the questions. You see both of them now on your screen. We will begin with ERA 2024 results, so please use the one on the left part first. And then once we will move to the ERA 2025 part, we will kindly ask you to connect to another slide part dedicated specifically for that representation part. So we will begin with ERA 2024. I give you a brief moment maybe to scan the QR codes. If you're on mobile devices or basically take a look at the chat message. I would assume that it is done. If not, you can also find a link throughout the presentation and in the Microsoft Teams platform chat, which Pia has added. And I hope that we can proceed further on now. Good. A brief agenda. As mentioned, we will start with ERA 2024. We have context and mainly for you. We will begin. We will proceed with some input data and methodological insights there. We will also share with you the findings of ERA 2024, the key findings, and we will also tell you what are the next steps for ERA 2024. In a brief moment, I will hand the word to Ralph. Meanwhile, after the session, we will stop for a brief moment to take a look at all the questions which you have raised, and we'll do our best to answer all of them or to the most extent which will be possible. Once we finish this one, we will proceed with ERA 2025 part, and we will have Aaron and Gregory again making the presentation. We will have also a moment for a Q&A session, which I will be very happy also to lead through, and then we can focus on specific questions, so focusing on ERA 2025. And with this, I'm very happy to give the floor to Ralph. And yes, Ralph, if you can unmute yourself, try to speak, and if possible, also turn on your camera. That would be fantastic, so that participants could also see.
So camera is on and microphone open, so everybody hopefully can see and hear me. Good morning to all of you. My name is Ralph Pfeiffer, and I'm from Ampron, where I'm head of the unit which is in charge of our international planning affairs. But today I'm speaking to you rather in my role as a convener of the ERA steering group, and I'm pleased to present you the results of the ERA 2024 edition. I would like to start with some background and context information first. So I guess Lucas, you will continue running the slides, so please move on to the next one. Some background information. I said maybe particular to those of you who may be new or less familiar still to the ERA product. ERA is a legal mandate to ENTSO-E as of Article 23 of the Electricity Regulation, which aims to monitor and to have a look at how security supply will evolve or change in our system, which is subject to rapid changes, many rapid changes from renewable integration, mainly market completion and so on, over the next period of up to 10 years. It is a full pan-European monitoring assessment of the resource adequacy based I would say at unprecedented worldwide size in terms of coverage of the area and complexity and modeling, and it is based on that makes it actually so complex, also on probabilistic adequacy. The purpose and motivation of ERA is to identify adequacy risks, or may say risks only, since it doesn't provide solutions, but it is by identifying risk, it is a tool to support the decision makers in actions to be taken to mitigate those risks and to maintain security supply and the corresponding reliability standards. ERA has been implemented gradually over the last four years. 2024 is the 4th edition, and each of the editions builds up on the previous one with further improvements. Same as for 2024, where the 2023 edition, which was the first ever approved ERA by ACER, was the basis, and further methodological improvements have been introduced themselves, on which I will elaborate a bit further on. So let's move on to the next slide, please, Lucas. At least my screen doesn't move yet. Now it has moved. Yep, thanks. So to give you an overview on this, let's say, wide area assessment, what is the coverage? It's more or less the entire Europe, which is modeled there explicitly with a few exemptions here, but most of Europe is part of the ERA. Explicitly modeled means full modeling, full market and considerations, and with some neighboring or outside countries, there's an implicit modeling applied. That means that we still have the exchanges with those countries outside the ENTSO-E perimeter in the ERA. The market-wise, we have introduced considerable improvement in this edition by applying flow-based market modeling for the first time ever for the Nordic regions, and we extended the flow-based market coupling representation for the core region, which was previously only part of the adequacy analysis, but it's now also included in the investment modeling part of the ERA. Please move ahead. Always takes quite a while till the slides move. Obviously, when you have a model and do an analysis of let's say such a wide area scope on an interconnected system for the entire Europe, of course, a number of assumptions have a mutual impact and regional interrelations. And this effect, so it's not only relevant for the region where something is modeled specifically, but has an impact also in particular to the neighbors, immediate neighbors, but maybe even wider spread through the entire observed region here in the simulations. These effects relate to various types of data, and the ERA 2024 has elaborated a bit on that. Maybe it is assumed a generation portfolio, but also, let's say, assumptions on costs for new generation and storage capacities and demand side flexibility features, which are expressed to the cost of new entry parameter, the Kone value, where divergences between regions and countries may have an impact there. And also what is relevant to consider that the diverging reliability standards between member states also have mutual impact on the results. Since it is such divergence does occur because it is the prerogative of each member state to define its reliability standard, but the mutual impact needs to be considered and will be shown on the later slide. Please move on again. Here as an example, we can see that we, about the Kone values I mentioned on the previous slide already, shows some divergence across a couple of member states here, which are displayed here. The ERA methodology by default says that the investment model shall consider Kona values which have been concluded from the national studies on this. However, we observed that these national studies have different scope, different assumptions have been carried out at different points in times, and therefore the results even diverge quite considerably. That was a major consideration in ERA 2024 because such divergences in investment could also lead on result in let's say biased investment results, because when you have regions close to each other, next to each other, but you have a significant a difference in the cost of new entry, investments may be allocated though where it's cheaper to serve the purpose in the neighboring region, and that is something which has to be investigated and observed and concluded on thoroughly. Please move on, Lucas. That is exactly what I have just said here on this slide, that we have observed these situations and finally have concluded that in the central reference scenario we have applied in ERA 2024, we should use harmonized Kona sets for those technologies, and that is then particularly gas turbine expansion, where we it does not seem very well robust or reasonable or appropriate to do the investment modeling with such diverging Kona values. In particular, since you may well understand that manufacturers also operate worldwide more or less, or mature technologies should come, at least here in Europe, in different countries, at rather the same cost, instead of having large divergences between the member states. Therefore, we have applied that in our modeling for the gas turbines. For other technologies, we have kept country-specific Kona values because we consider them maybe more subject to national specificities in particular when it comes, for example, to demand side flexibilities, where the costs may reflect specific ambitions or strategies in member states, specific sectors of demand side flexibilities, or in term with regard to storage, also different technologies or different ratios between energy and power capacity, and so are applied. So that may be quite reasonable actually to stay with the diverging values, whereas for a mature and more uniform technology like the gas turbines, it appeared to us more reasonable to switch to harmonized investment costs across Europe. Please move on. Another very relevant point to mention about mutual impact of results or mutual impact of parameters is a reliability standard. I already said it's a prerogative of each member state to define it, and when you observe different regions or regions with very different reliability standard, they have a mutual impact. That is shown here by an example where let's assume a member state A and a member state B are neighbors to each other. They have good interconnected capacities and even equal Kona values, but different reliability standards, and assume that the country A has contracted capacity mechanisms already. Then the stricter reliability standard of this of this member state R triggers investment in capacity, in particular since there's a capacity mechanism available which triggers such or gives such incentives. However, these incentives and this available capacity in member state A has also impact on member state B through the interconnections. That means that even though member state B has a more relaxed reliability standards, the investments in A have an impact and may then actually, let's say, reduce the adequacy indicators that despite a more reliability standard, more relaxed reliability standard, that member states benefits from the capacities in A and actually achieves a lower reliability level than required by its standards. Just to mention this impact we observe throughout and is relevant also to understand the general outcomes and results on the adequacy indicators in ERAA, and it is also relevant also that should be taken into account that when specifying reliability standards and procuring or implementing capacity mechanisms, that such mutual impact should be taken into consideration, and a coordinated approach within a region of neighboring countries or so can bring additional benefits here when dimensioning such mechanisms. But that is subsequent to ERAA. Just the ERAA results shall be understood in this context accordingly. Please move on to the next slide. Now, I would like also to reflect on some input data and methodology aspects of the ERAA 2024. What were the main improvements? Actually, the main improvements were also a reason for the delay, and I forgot to apologize for this big delay we have in ERAA 2024 at the beginning of our presentation. Actually, you should have expected these results already at the end of 2024. Now it's 4 months, more than 4 months later. That has also been a case, or we deeply regret this, but that was actually also a consequence of the many improvements we have introduced there, because there were many things on the modeling to be implemented newly, to be tested, preliminary results to be validated, or reruns to be done in order to achieve the, let's say, desired quality of results. All of this took somewhat longer than expected, and as you can easily imagine, that when you do many new implementations, that may come along also with some difficulties until you have the final results. So what we did here in particular, ERAA 2024 had a new approach in climate modeling. The previous editions were based on historical weather scenarios and historical weather data, where now the ERAA 2024 is based on climate projections. This allows us to also take into consideration through the weather scenario modeling also climate change impacts for the first time, and is certainly therefore a step forward towards the full implementation of the ERAA methodology. Also, the consistency between the main modules, the investment modeling, EVA, and the adequacy analysis has been improved by what I mentioned already earlier, further implementing and improving the implementation of flow-based market coupling, as said, for the very first time, for the Nordic region and for the core region, not only in the adequacy simulations, but also in the investment modeling of the EVA. These were the main improvements and new implementations in ERAA 2024. Go ahead, please. And just to give you an overview again on how the entire ERA works. There are two main modules in there: the economic viability assessment, the investment modeling, and the economic dispatch modeling, which then, based on a Monte Carlo simulation, determines the adequacy metrics. It all starts with a data collection where, based on let's say information available from each member here, each TSO, on the national developments and the national NECPs, energy and climate projections, the relevant data about generation capacity, market issues, or data like the cross-border transmission capacities, but also the climate data based about installed capacities of renewable generation, hydro, temperature profiles, but also demand forecasts are collected and put into the let's say ENTSO-E databases, and they form then the basis for the first step, which is the economic viability assessment, where the objective to determine the economic portfolio of adequacy capacities. Adequacy capacities consist of capacity, storage, and demand-side flexibilities. And these portfolios then are modeled in the central reference scenario, based on which the adequacy runs are carried out by applying a stochastic analysis and a so-called Monte Carlo simulations, where a large number of weather projections or weather scenarios are combined with a also larger number of different outage scenarios of the dispatchable generation capacities. And based on this, we do the market simulations, which deliver the adequacy matrices. The two metrics which can be concluded are the loss of load expectation expressed in hours per year, and the expected energy not served in terms of gigawatt hours per year, so energy per year. The reliability standards, where they exist in member states, are typically expressed through loss of load expectation. So that may be the even more relevant metric, as it is relevant for identifying whether let's say there is a true adequacy issue by exceeding a reliability standard or not. But of course also the ENS gives relevant information, because LOLA, it only doesn't say anything about how severe a loss of load may be, just expresses how many hours you may be subject to such expectations, but doesn't say anything about the severity in terms of the energy, which may not be supplied in such cases. That is about the general framework and how the ERA is established. About a bit more in detail about the ERA 2024 scope. We have simulated 4 target years, 2026, 28, 2030, and 2035, which establish altogether then the framework of the next 10 years. In the EVA step, so the investment modeling to determine the economic viable portfolio, we have applied the optimization based on cost minimization approach, but also in parallel a case study was carried out about a different EVA approach in this era, based on a revenue-based iterative revenue-based approach for the EVA. As said, that was a case study which has delivered its results and will also be subject to further development in the next era, because many of you may know, and that in particular this economic viability assessment is subject to discussions about the representation of investors' behavior, for example, and therefore we are still exploring different options there on even how to further improve it. About the weather scenarios in ERA 2024, because of the complexity of the investment model, that can be simulated only with a reduced weather set of weather scenarios of 3, which then were weighted with different weighting factors in order to, which shall, let's say, give them each of the weather scenarios a weight according to the representation of all 36 weather scenarios, which were calculated and then simulated in the adequacy runs. Forced outage modeling is another feature I mentioned in the previous slide already, that we combine the weather scenarios with samplings of outage scenarios of generation capacity. So 15 different outage patterns have been considered and combined with the 36 weather scenarios, resulting then in the entire set of Monte Carlo simulations of the adequacy runs. Next point. Also already mentioned how we do the modeling of the transmission capacities, cross-border transmission capacities, flow-based in core and Nordic, and NTC modeling for the other countries or market regions. Also, yep, we do the a probabilistic approach, which particular, well, each of the runs is deterministic in the adequacy model, but the let's say probabilistic comes from doing this for many weather scenarios, many weather patterns, and then conclude on the statistic outcomes in terms of the adequacy indicators. And finally, last point to mention here is the granularity of the results in and output. So in EVA, as a result, we see figures then on expansion or decommissioning or life extension of capacities which contribute to the adequacy, and on the adequacy runs we have the metrics as explained already before in terms of the LOLI and ENS parameters. Next slide, please. Now let's come to the results and key takeaways from this ERA 2024 edition. First, the main outcome of the economic viability assessment. What we can see here is something rather similar to observations we also saw in the previous ERA editions, that in the earlier target years, the investment modeling typically tends to reduce the generation portfolio, because many capacities of a thermal generation plant are considered as becoming more and more uneconomic and no longer viable, and will are decommissioned then by the investment modeling. That results in a net reduction then of capacities, as you can see here on the lines on the top of this diagrams, which are the installed capacities pre EVA, that's the light blue line, and the dark blue line are the capacities after the investment modelings. Only in the longer term, after 2030 towards 2035, the trend is vice versa, or in the opposite direction, where the investment modeling results in a net increase of generation capacities. This, and on the lower part of this slide, you see distinguished by different technologies where the decommissionings or commissionings are allocated to. It's mainly the coal capacities, coal-fired generation capacities, which are decommissioned by the model in the earlier target years, and that comes on top of any policy-driven exits. For example, in Germany, where we have a coal exit defined on a legal basis already, that is already considered in the pre-EVA capacities, but these are only, what you see here are only the changes in capacities which come from this economic viability assessment. So based on these capacities, then the adequacy runs are carried out, and on the next two slides you will see on the pan-European map the relevant indicators. So what do we see here for each of the target years, specifically here on this slide, the first two ones, the next two ones are on the next slide. We see for each country or each market region here of Europe the low values by the blue bubbles, and the larger a bubble, the higher the low value is, and also the color code gives a kind of classification between low, medium, and high low values amongst different countries here in Europe. So the general trend you may observe here already between 2026 and 2028 is that the LOLE values increase over the target years, and obviously it appears that in Central Europe higher LOLE can be observed compared to southern or southeastern or southwestern part of Europe. Also, the southern parts of Scandinavia and the Baltic regions are subject to higher LOLE values. This trend continues when we now have a look now at the later target years, 2030 and 2035 on the next slide. Again, a trend towards increasing adequacy issues in terms of the LOLE parameters. Those single countries also you may observe a development against the general trend, but overall observation is it increases over time and remains also focused on Central Europe and southern part of Scandinavia and the Baltic region. That are the main observation, and also which is not displayed here, but if you are aware of the reliability standard, these high values often coincide then with violations or exceedance of national reliability standards. Lucas, please move on. Some key takeaways more general now from this ERA 2024 editions. From the investment modeling, we see that until 2030, significant volumes of the thermal capacity, fossil fuel capacity become economic non-viable, and incentives would need to be taken to keep them let's say, in the market, or at least available for adequacy issues. These issues increase because though the renewable generation capacities expand rapidly over the coming years based on the estimates and the national policy targets, these renewable capacities contribute less to the adequacy of the system, mainly because of their resource dependence and the intermittency of the generation. These rest capacities are not sufficient to compensate the loss or the displacement of the dispatchable and rather firm generation capacities over the years, and also and this trend is even increased if in parallel to because in parallel of the increase of the rest generation, also the electricity demand increases. And in the I didn't elaborate on the demand data here, but in particular towards the longer end of our simulation, so 2035, a significant increase of electricity demand has been reported and modeled here in this analysis. In order to maintain or achieve the reliability standards, or the actual reliability, maintain it within the limits of the reliability standards, there is an urgent and increasing need to deploy flexibility solutions and infrastructure, and also resource generation capacities in order to mitigate the propagation of the adequacy issues we observe here in this ERA exercise. And what is also important to mention, that the ERA is a pan-European investigation. As according to the legislative framework, any adequacy issue which is identified by the ERA is already, let's say, a sufficient indicator to implement at national level capacity mechanisms. However, on top of the ERA, national resource adequacy assessment are carried out or can be carried out, which can provide complementary information, because they can shed a more detailed and more focused light on national specificities than the pan-European ERA can, so that these are very relevant for identifying further adequacy concerns above or beyond this ERA, and therefore it all needs to be taken into consideration in a complementary way when deciding or investigating at national level which mechanisms to introduce in order to mitigate adequacy concerns. Okay, I guess before I finish this part of the presentation, a brief outlook on what are the next steps. I guess there are 2 more slides to come on this. Since the ERA has been published at the beginning of this week on the ENTSO-E website, the entire documentation and data sets, all of this is now open for public consultation. So we invite all stakeholders here to contribute to this consultation. Give us your feedback, give us your input, your opinions on this ERA, and you have the opportunity still for a couple of weeks until mid of May. 16th of May is the deadline for this public consultation. In parallel, this ERA has been submitted by ENTSO-E to ACER, who shall build its opinion and conclude and make a decision on approval or amendment of ERA within the next 3 months. Final slide, please. Oh, that was the final slide already. Good. So now I guess we have the opportunity for a Q&A session on this part of our webinar today.
Indeed. Thank you, Ralph. I already saw quite a few questions. I'm trying now to switch the screen so that it's also everyone and we could follow. There, just give me a brief moment, and it will be there soon. Right. So the Q&A session is not yet over. Based on this screen, what we see, we have 12 questions so far raised. Some of them were upvoted quite a lot. So I see additional ones being added. So don't hesitate, of course, to add further questions. Keep them upvoting, and we'll try to tackle the ones which are most indicated as the most interesting ones. And what we see here, by the way, just one emphasis as well. So this is the Q&A session on ERA 2024 results. If there are any questions about ERA 2025 input data, there is a separate link in the chat. Be cautious on which link you are using to raise your questions, and allocate them appropriately. Now, I believe that here we have mostly the questions on ERA 2024 results. We can begin with the first one, which we see on the screen, which points to different results between the cost minimization EVA and revenue-based EVA approaches. Ralph, would you like maybe to address this first question, which is indicated as very interesting question by at least 8 people in this webinar?
I'm just reading it. You're very different as well. So does it mean? No, it shall not mean this. I guess indeed these two steps have different objectives, and in the first step of the EVA, the main objective or purpose is to identify the economic viable portfolio in terms of generation, storage, and demand side flexibilities. And in a second step, the adequate simulations are simulated, and we also did, of course, validate the EVA results in terms of the viability and so on, and found that these outcomes are reasonable, have been validated, and therefore I would not say that even because of the different objectives or so that the results are not representative. I guess the representativeness of the EVA results have been validated against the adequacy model.
Okay, thank you. I would mark it that it's quite clearly answered, and then we could proceed with the other questions as long as we at least have them. Second question, which we have now at the top of the screen, is speaking about the actually quite a technical nuances that generator revenues are capped below value of loss of load, which is basically capped by the price caps from the models. And a question saying if this means that cost minimization EVA overestimates the capacity that will be observed in the market. Would you like to answer this one, or maybe should we ask some comments also from Gregorio? I let you decide.
I guess Gregorio's a good expert to answer this.
Yes, sure, I can jump in. Good morning also from my side. Well, that's a relevant question, but however, I would propose the opposite interpretation, right? So in ERA, we are modeling, or we are performing market simulations, and currently in the day ahead, but also intraday market in Europe, we have a harmonized price cap rules that are in place and effective. So it's not that we are limiting the generator revenues intentionally in ERA. We are trying to reflect what's happening actually in the real market auctions. So as the auctions are capped with certain price cap values. And if you recall, you can check also in the Annex 1, we do try to estimate how possibly the day-ahead price cap also may increase and reflect this in our simulation. But it's a specific conscious choice not to use the value of loss load to remunerate the generators, because this would be against indeed the current market rules. And so we would rather have the opposite problem, that if we remunerate the generators with the vol, we would overestimate the capacity that is viable on the market. So we really want to avoid that. The whole purpose of ERA, indeed, is to highlight if there is a gap or missing money problem between the capacity that is viable on the market and the optimal capacity from a total welfare perspective, whereas the total welfare value of the electricity, let's say in that sense, or ENS is the vol, but we need to model using the price cap in our simulations.
All right, thank you, Gregorio. Right, I would say that this was also clarified. We can proceed with the other questions to make sure that we address as many as possible within our available time. Ralph, that's a question probably if we have assessed adequacy and have derived LOLE indicators using post-revenue-based EVA results as well.
Sorry, now it's about, we're talking about the question on the top here, yeah?
So yeah, the
case study is a case study we did on the revenue-based EVA, focused on comparing actually what the main outcome of the EVA, which is the investment and portfolio, or portfolio we receive, then as an investment area, it's less relevant to look at the LOLE values. But what we can conclude, we had two different EVA approaches in our case study based on revenue based, and tried or the exercise was to achieve alignment between the models to achieve or to check whether with the aligned models we result in comparable outcomes on the generation or adequacy capacity for portfolio. That was the main objective of this exercise. We will investigate or continue the implementation of the revenue-based approach in ERA 2025, when it will extend also to the let's say validation or of the ED runs and the LOLE values and so on. That is rather subject also to the ongoing exercises on implementing the revenue-based EVA as an alternative to the cost minimization approach.
Right, great, thank you. Marking this as answered, we have another question. It's quite technical about the result interpretation. I would tend to ask probably Gregorio directly you if you could clarify the answer on this question.
For the sake of time, I can provide a written answer. We can add it in the slide. It's just about the interpretation of the results of EVA, how we place them in the table, but there's no issue in the model. It's just about how we report the capacity. I'm drafting a written answer. You will see it in a few seconds.
Okay, great. And I believe we also clarified how the results should be interpreted within the reports and Annex 3 specifically. So I would also welcome this anonymous webinar viewer to also consult the description in there. And typically in all our engagements, we are using the same framework to present the results and the same interpretation of those results. All right. I will mark this as answered, but then in the comment you may receive additional clarification. We still have some minutes, so I suggest that we proceed a little bit further, but eventually we will need to also switch to another part of the presentation. But for the moment, we can also focus on this question at the top. We have 2024 ERA results, which are different from those in previous ERA studies? Does this mean that ERA is not providing reliable results because the results are very sensitive to the modeling implementation? Ralph, I don't know, would you like maybe to give your point of view on this question?
Well, it is not about only the difference in result. It's we have multiple reasons here for which may have impact on the results. Yes, it's modeling implementation where we proceed further, which has an impact, but also the input data. The input data have an impact, and they have also changed considerably compared to the previous editions. It is therefore very difficult, or saying these results are not reliable. Or of course, one cannot deny that there is a certain sensitivity towards modeling implementation, but also towards input data, and since, well, the entire thing is a kind of still developing. It's agreed that the modeling implementation shall happen gradually. It is quite obvious then when we do an annual exercise, which always starts with collecting latest data, that you see changes compared to the previous edition. So I would say yes, I could subscribe to the statement, say we see different results. I'm still not convinced that they are very different, because we still consider them in the range of the previous editions. Maybe, of course, there are exceptions for single parameters, also for single member states, but in general, there is a difference, but I wouldn't label them as very different. And again, such a difference is, to me, also, or to us, a logical consequence of the gradual implementation of the methodology and the update of the input data every year for every cycle. So that is part of the entire, let's say, framework on how we shall do the ERA.
Yes, great, thank you, fantastic. Right, very insightful answer. I'm marking this also as answered. I also following question about some very specific wind capacity factors, which will be partially touched in the following part of the presentation. So I will just mark it as answered, while I expected rather more to be answered in coming minutes. Just for the sake of maybe catching one more question. Just trying to take a look if there is anything specific what we could answer, because I believe that now mostly the questions have one like added. So we have one specific question about LOLE in Austria, about demand assumptions. Right. So okay. I just wonder, actually, Ralph or Gregor, if you can answer this one additional question on Austria, but we really will need to move on.
Well, of course, that is very specific, and you will need to have a detailed look at also the Austrian data. But typically, where we observe an increase also from 2030 to 2035, a main general driver for such increases is the demand increase, a significant demand increase we observe in this longer term target years. And if, let's say, the pace of the demand development is not matched with the development of the capacities which provide adequacy, then typically you see such an increase. That is a more general observation. What comes on top specifically to Austria, I could only say when having a closer look or more detailed look at the Austrian data.
Okay, great. So I could also just welcome some people if you're interested on some specific country results or perspective of specific TSO. You can also consult the annex with the country comments. Often our members provide more insights on these results. So you're welcome to do this. Meanwhile, since there was this question about detailed demand assumptions, I would also use this opportunity to remind that we tend to publish as much data as it is possible related to the demand assumptions and the data. The detailed demand time series on hourly granularity for each possible weather scenario is published, and it's also open for you to take a look. And you can also derive any metric which you're interested in, including this peak demand capacity evolution over time. However, at this moment, I would tend now to come back to our presentation deck and transition to a second part of the presentation. If you allow me just a moment, it should be here. Yes, so we had the Q&A, we finished. We have ERA 25 call for evidence part. Again, just a short introduction from my side. I will not spend too much of the time. We are working at this moment with some ambitions, of course, for the following era, and they will revolve around revenue-based EVA approach, which we have received few questions already. So it's very interesting to see the interest from our dear webinar attendees. So we want to work further on this even during this year. We also want to pay an extra attention on investor behavior representation in our models. We want to review the weather sample selection for EVAs, and we also want to continue working with Acer and especially collaborate to establish a systemic solution on the Kona data set, which was also mentioned by Ralph just a moments ago. So these are at least the one of the four main emphases for the 2025. Nevertheless, for this moment, we are focusing mostly about the call for evidence and the data sets which we have consolidated, which we have published and shared with you, and a little bit about the data collection process itself. I will welcome Aaron to share these insights. Then we will proceed with the specific insights on the data specifically. And here I would welcome Gregorio then to join us. But before I transition to that, once again, emphasis is here that for the questions on this presentation part, please use this link on the screen, the QR code or the code to join Slido. There is also a link in the Microsoft Teams chat, but be cautious and take the last link. I believe it is explicitly mentioned that the link is used for ERA 2025 presentation part, and it will address this call for evidence presentation part. Said this, I hope that Aaron, you are here.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, so I can hear you very well.
All right. Thanks for the handover, Lucas. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Zuiker, and I'm system modeling specialist in data models. So when the study teams were still working on finalizing ERA 2024 data models, we already had to start preparing and collecting data for the next version of ERA 2025. So I'll start off by just this sort of high-level explanation of the data collection process used for ERA 2025. So any data collection process starts obviously with preparation. So this is done in collaboration with the study team, where we try to define the scope of the next study, the regional scope, also the new study target years, the different scenarios, and based on that we know every single piece of information that we need to collect. So every single data point has to be predefined in its highest detail, because we are using a set of different IT tools to collect data, primarily the so-called PEMDB app. So we need to first build these data models that define every single piece of information that needs to be collected from the TSOs. Once that's prepared and tested, we start the data collection or data submission process. So we invite the data correspondents from the different TSOs to submit their data and also their projected data on future installed capacities according to their best estimates. So during this process, we also organize a series of internal webinars and Q&A sessions that in case TSOs have questions on maybe on the data interpretations, that we can further explain them and also put them in direct contact with the team of the study team so that they know how their data in the end might affect the modeling results. So we're really sure that they provide the best data possible. At the same time, so when they upload data to the in this case the PAMDB app, immediately and automatically this data set in its entirety is checked according to a series of predefined validation rules. So these can be very simple, checking whether the format is correct, whether the data is in a certain allowable range of values, whether it doesn't conflict with other data fields as well. So this is one part of the checks. Unfortunately, we cannot automate everything, so we also still rely on the expert's opinion, so the opinion of the TSO. So we also have various visualization tools in place that after the data has been approved, it can then be seen in these graphs. So yeah, this way, things that we cannot really pick out by machine can then still be seen as maybe anomalies in the graphs. Then here it says test market models. This is still something under development because ultimately we also try to prevent any sort of conflicts of data later in the modeling, which might result to model infeasibilities, optimization errors. So we really try to sort of catch these as early in the process as possible. So what we're developing is the possibility to quite immediately after the first data release to run a series of simplified models that might be able to identify these potential infeasibilities, so we can still catch them on early. Once the deadline for this data submission period has ended, we deliver the first preliminary data release to the so-called Data Quality Task Force. So the Data Quality Task Force is a combined collaboration between TSO experts and ENTSO-E staff, where they conduct a series of qualitative checks to double check the data that has been provided, to have a sort of a second opinion on the data as well. Any potential issues found are then reported back to the data correspondent, the TSO, and that can then lead to still some data to be corrected. Afterwards, there's another data delivery, which is the one that we have right now. So that's the one that we use for the public call for evidence, which started today. And then based on the feedback we'd receive, there will be another update window organized in a few weeks' time to afterwards really deliver the final data package to be used by the modeling teams. Next slide, please. Yes, so exactly what type of data are we talking about? Here we'll just briefly explain to you the sort of the source data that we collect for ERAA. There's more data that we use, but these are usually a result of several post-processing steps. So for now, we'll just focus on really what type of raw data we collect. So on the top, you see the PCD. So this stands for the Pan-European Climate Database, for which we got a new version in ERAA for ERAA 2024, which we continue to use for 2025 as well, and any future versions. So this includes all the weather and climate dependent data in the studies. So these are generation profiles for renewables, such as hydro, wind and solar, but also contains other weather and climate variables, such as temperature, wind speeds, irradiance, etc., which we will need to generate the demand profiles in their demand forecasting toolbox. So this is something we get from the supplier, and then we use the PAMDB app to collect what we call the PAMDB data. So this stands for the Pan-European Market Modeling Database, which includes mostly the data related to generation, storage, flexibility, and demand-side response, in addition to several input data that we need to run the demand forecasting toolbox, such as generation capacities for electric vehicles, heat pumps, and household batteries. Then we have a series of information that we need for on the network. So these are the net transfer capacity values that we also collect using flow-based domain parameters, such as the connect list, so the critical network elements and contingency list. And finally, also some other parameters on commodity prices and assumptions for EVA parameters. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here's some more high-level details, some key dates. So we already started to collect both the PEMDB and NTC data in November, starting in November 2025 until December 24, just before Christmas. And the demand data collection ran from 25th of November until January 17. The reason is that for demand, we generally need a little bit more time because we are both collecting input data via the PEMDB app as well as generating these load profiles in the demand forecasting toolbox, which takes quite some time from on the side of the TSO. So generally, this takes a bit longer. And yeah, as I was saying, the main tools we're using is the PEMDB app, which was actually used for the first time in ERA 2024, which basically allows us to more automatically and directly check the source data, which will which definitely increase the quality of data and also allows us to have a shorter and more efficient data collection process in the ERA timeline. Then the demand forecasting toolbox. So this is also an IT tool that we use or that TSOs use to calculate or generate demand profiles according to a universally homogeneous methodology. So this is also something that we use for creating these profiles. Then we have a data quality task force process. So as I was already explaining, this is a combined effort between TSOs and ENTSO-E staff to have another series of qualitative checks, second opinion on the data to make sure that we're not missing any crucial errors in the data. And based on this, we allow, based on those remarks, we allow TSOs to do some fixes on the data in February. Yes, next slide, please. Then I just want to spend 1 or 2 slides on the PCD. So for ERA 2025, we are using PCD 4.2.
Aaron, sorry. Just recognizing that the time is really flying. Can I suggest that we leave this for the attendees, maybe to take a look after we publish the slide deck, and we can focus on the second slide, if that's all right for you? Thank you.
So as I was saying, now we're using PCD 4.2 for ERA 2025. ERA 2024 use PCD 4.1. So I just want to highlight a few differences between the two. The main difference is there's an extended time horizon, so we have a few more historical years, and the projected years look a bit more into the future, going all the way to 2100. Doesn't really affect ERA because the ERA time horizon was already covered, but it's good to know that the size of the PCD increased. In addition to that, also the spatial resolution. So we actually reshaped some of the offshore PCD zones, mainly driven by some TSOs that would like to have a higher granularity of these so-called PCD regions in their offshore area. So this is something that we had to, that we changed. In terms of the methodology, primarily we only received one capacity factor time series for the generic solar PV technology, but now this has been split into 4 types of technologies: so rooftop residential, rooftop industrial, utility tracking PV, and utility non-tracking PV, to allow us to model this in a higher detail. Also now we allow for more user-defined prospective PV overplanting ratios, which is mostly captured in the PEMDB app. And finally, and this is also answering one of the questions, I hope, is that we have now a new method for the so-called wind bias adjustments, which ultimately led to more accurate wind speeds, also higher wind speeds, so that now leads to higher full load hours for from some countries, most notably for onshore wind. So I don't know the exact details of the countries that were mentioned in the question, but it could very well be the case that now these wind speeds of these countries are higher, and therefore we also see higher capacity factors. All right, thank you. I will give the floor now to Gregorio.
Great. Gregorio, can
Yes,
you
I'm
speak?
here. I'm here.
Great, fantastic. We can hear you. Please go ahead. And if you can, let's wrap in the 8 to 10 minutes.
Yes, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Lucas. Good morning again, also from my side. I'm Gregorio Iotti from APG, but as Ralph said, also I'm here today representing ENTSO-E, especially in my role as market study team convener of both ERA 24 and also confirmed for ERA 25. It's just for the ones who doesn't know me yet. Now jumping into the content, I will give you a rather short introduction and high-level figures overview on the data collection of data that we publish and also open for you to collect your evidences. So I invite you indeed. I also placed a link in this slide, but I'm sure you know already on the ENTSO-E website, you can find all the data that have been published so far. Open for call for evidence, have a look, participate. Also for the sake of time of this webinar, which was indeed already quite extensive, I will not go through detailed visuals and anything, because you can also have a look yourself and focus on the member states you are particularly interested in and provide your evidences accordingly. That said, a few set of assumptions that are important when we check some of the visuals and also when you assess the data that are published. Of course, these are preliminary results, are still subject to corrections, potentially also based on the evidences that some of you as stakeholders may provide to us. So there will be also a review window after the closure of the call for evidence, and there will be then the publication of the what we call post-call for evidence data set. These are constituted by TSO data collected from TSOs, therefore also obviously prior to the economic viability assessment step, and they also are in line and compliance with the national energy and climate plans. We will also complement the data set with a survey asking TSOs about compliancy and highlighting if and where there is or there was the need to fill the gap with some data or to misalign from the NSEPs. The 4 target years of ERA 25 are probably well known: 2028, 30, 33, and 35. So we go up to the year plus 10. Of course, the installed capacity are reported here as of 1st of July of the target year. So that means that, of course, in some cases, especially for thermal units or other type of projects, you might have an expected commissioning or decommissioning date. And in some cases, this can be also during the year, obviously. We try to reflect, and we reflect this properly in our models, but for the sake of data visualization, we need to establish a cutoff date, which is then 1st of July. You can see, of course, also that out of market capacity is included, but there is a filter in the dashboard, so you can also check specifically the different operational status. And also the same holds for DSR and batteries. You can also assess separately or together the capacity of what we call as explicit DSR, so directly available on the market, implicit DSR, so reacting rather to market prices beyond or after the price formation. Again, the figures I'm showing here includes both out of market capacity and market capacity, and also implicit and explicit DSR. Maybe let's move to the next slide then. This is the general overview of the whole supply and demand side, with the caveat, of course, in the supply capacity here, I'm excluding electrolyzer and power to heat capacity, as of course they do not really qualify as supply capacity, but rather as flexible demand, and therefore it's also shown in a slide later. A few keynotes on this slide, which are also showing then on the right-hand side the average annual demand increase and also the compound annual growth rate, both for areas or member states in the member states of the European Union, but also additional areas that we cover in our perimeter, as it was shown before in this meeting. A few notes here. Of course, you can see how there is definitely a steady increase in generation capacity over the horizon. Obviously, this is driven, as expected, by the deployment of renewable energy sources, but you can also notice quite a high contribution of storage, and especially from grid-scale batteries. I have some more insights in the next slide. The main contributors, just to give you some figures, but again, all details are available in the dashboard. We do observe, or we do expect, according to the data supplied by TSOs, to almost double the installed wind capacity between 2028 to 2035. So with additional 400 gigawatt of capacity, which is almost equally shared between onshore and offshore new wind farm projects. Solar is, of course, also the next biggest, or even the biggest contributor to the capacity increase, with again around additional 400 gigawatt of new capacity expected in the perimeter. So we're really talking about a tremendous increase of capacity from renewable energy. And also we do see flexibility resources, as I mentioned. I have a detailed slide later, but in general, we see around 100 gigawatt of new battery capacity expected on the market, and 200 and up to 200, more than 200 gigawatt in 2035. So also let's say the expectations following the national energy plans of member states of increase in battery capacity is really tremendous. What is also a little bit offset by a decrease in thermal, traditional, especially fossil fuel capacity. So we move from around 500 gigawatt in 2028 down to around 380 in 2035. So around 100 gigawatt of thermal capacity is expected to leave the system, driven by, of course, decarbonization targets, but also by the natural aging of the thermal fleet in Europe, or also on the perimeter in general. If we focus on nuclear specifically, it stays rather constant over the whole system, so around 100, 105 gigawatt of installed nominal capacity. And of course, we have a marginal addition of around 4 gigawatt after 2030. This is, of course, driven by, as you know, some member states or some countries like UK, Sweden, and Hungary are expecting to commissioning new nuclear capacity, new nuclear units, but is also offset by some still phase out of nuclear that is planned in some countries, for example, in Spain. So the net effect on the system is in the end to have the nuclear rather stable with just a marginal increase towards the end of the horizon. What stays also stable, as you can see in the figure, is also the hydropower capacity, where we have around only 30 gigawatt of increase over the horizon. We have a increase on the supply side. We also have an increase, as you see, quite steadily on the demand side. We have around more than 2.5% of a compound annual growth rate, which is definitely not negligible. Please keep in mind that this is also reported as average. So it means that it's the average, of course, over the different 36 weather scenarios that we have in the ERAA, of course, as the temperature profiles and other factors affect also the value of the demand. That was the general overview. I would propose to move to the next slide, please, where we have more of a deep dive and the focus on flexibility resources, which is, of course, a very important.
Yeah. To this one, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Just one quick remark, which I think it's important. You can see indeed, as I mentioned before, a quite steady increase in flexibility resources and also in power to X, electrolyzers, and power to heat. What I wanted to mention is simply that for the average peak demand, there is also a steady increase. And important to keep in mind for adequacy implications, the annual peak demand growth or growth rate is higher than the average demand. So that also means that, of course, the demand is growing, but especially the peak demand and its sensitivity to the outside temperature is growing. That's very relevant for adequacy. But that said, you can probably skip to the next, yes. Also, maybe not
Same here, maybe?
Yep. That's also here just very quickly, high increase of battery capacity with a factor almost 4. Quite interesting to observe, but not a spectacular visual, I would say. Please have a look at the dashboard. Let's move to the next one. This is maybe also an important point of focus because, of course, commodity prices affect the merit order of units, especially in this case of thermal, fossil fuel fire capacity, nuclear as well, and they also then have an impact on the EVA results. This year, we follow a similar approach compared to last year, so we rely heavily on IEA World Energy Outlook for our estimates. Of course, we have an updated version of the report from 2024, and then we perform a simple linear interpolation between 2030 and 2040 either, and backwards to estimate then the 2028 results. Some point of focus here also is that we also updated the values compared to last year into 2024 monetary values of euro. That's why you see an increase also for the commodities for which we use the same, let's say in terms of real value the same, but in terms of nominal currency, you will observe an increase. Not much to say else here. Of course, feel free, and we invite you to provide evidence on these estimates because they're very important. So we really want to know where you see maybe something that we shall take into consideration. To the next slide, it's also very quickly, it's the same figures, but also with a more I would say readable visual format. What is interesting also, to be very fast, couple comments here, is that you will observe, or you can observe that the fossil fuel estimates of prices tends to decrease over the horizon. I'm talking about natural gas, crude oil, and hard coal mainly. This is in line with the IEA expectation that the global demand would probably also reach a plateau and then possibly decrease, and especially the European domestic demand for this type of fuels. That's why we're observing a decrease towards the future of the horizon. You may, however, observe that the gas blend price instead increases over the horizon. This is due to the fact that the share of synthetic methane and biomethane that we expect to be injected in the European gas grid will increase according to also European target. The values for this gas blend are currently being refined and are coming from an ENTSO-E internal estimate, but we engage with several stakeholders. And that means, however, that we do estimate that in our models, the gas-fired units will need to pay the gas blend price and not the natural gas price according to the European gas market. Therefore, this has an impact also in the merit order, and we're also happy to hear any opinion or evidence on this. Yes, that concludes. I would say I was very fast. Sorry, also for the sake of time. But again, the purpose of today was just to give some high-level insights, and we are looking forward to collect all your evidences.
Okay. Apologies, of course, then for the attendees, but much appreciate, Gregorio, for you speeding it up. And yes, there is a link also. The presentation will be published, but yeah, the consultations are anyway online. We actually ran out of the time, but I would still use the opportunity to at least answer a couple of questions verbally for the sake of the recording, even if people need to leave. Feel free, if you need to leave, then roll back the recording to check the answer. We also provided some answers in written form already to the majority of given questions. So I'm really happy about this. So just switching the screen quickly for the sake of addressing at least a couple of main questions, so the most important ones. It should be here. Yes. Right. So at least for this first one now, Gregorio, if you could answer this one about the mothballing and demothballing costs. Please go ahead.
Yes. So I can confirm for sure we will not assume zero mothballing cost. That would not be realistic. Actually, it could be, we will check this if the mothballing costs were not included currently in the call for evidence for 2025. It might simply have been due to a unplanned, I would say, missing data. The reason is that, however, that the call for evidence is rather focused on national specific KONE values, whereas for mothballing costs, we have central estimates. And these are the same, so at this point in time, these are the same as we use for ERA 24. So you shall assume that they stay the same, unchanged. But as was mentioned previously in the presentation, the whole KONE set and techno-economic parameters for EVA, it's a very sensitive and important topic, which we are also discussing intensively with Acer. So there might be also updates coming in these items for the next over the next weeks or months.
Okay, thank you. I see also a similar question, apparently having the mothballing cost, but maybe you could just follow up on top of this as well. I just have highlighted here at the top, if you see.
Yes. I would need to check these implications, but in principle, in the models, we do not allow for monthly mothballing. That would be too complex for the EVA model at this point in time. So we just allow for either a full year, at least a full year of mothballing. We do not have sub-yearly mothballing options.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think it's also very valuable
Also,
comment.
because if I can complement, please keep in mind when we work with yearly estimates of FOM and operational cost, you shall not simply assume that you can split this value between 12 and this would be your average monthly cost. Of course, you have some maintenance and other costs that you need to have regardless the months you keep your power plant available. So it would also be at least in my opinion, not a good approach to somehow decompose the yearly cost into equal monthly costs.
Okay, thank you very much, Gregorio. And I see people upvoted also this question, which I wanted to give you as a follow-up. And for the others, in most cases, it was answered in a written way. And maybe one only not. So I suggest that we answer this question now verbally, Gregorio, and then we could finish this call as well.
Yes, sure. I mean, specifically on the German data, of course, I'm not in the level of detail as of today to give you a detailed answer. Of course, this is one of the evidence indeed that we invite you to provide during the call for evidence. We will follow up internally with the data correspondence of Germany, and we will check whether there was maybe some different aggregation of capacity, some change in assumption, or even some change in the national energy climate plan. And so we will follow up on this. I do not have an answer now.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I was going to highlight this question, which you see on the screen, if you have any additional perspective, actually from Rick as well. This is why I was a bit confused, but I don't know, before we finish, maybe would you like to maybe give a reflection on this one?
Well, these are okay. So when we say let's also first distinguish between some general statements that we need to make for the ERA as a whole overview of the implications in terms of adequacy and viability of capacity for the whole system, which of course may be different from specific cases into member states. Also, of course, indeed, the statement that we make of risk of economic decommissioning are an outcome of what we observe from our interpretation from observing the EVA results. Of course, that doesn't mean that the data that are collected reflect this risk. That's the whole purpose of the EVA, indeed, that to highlight whether some national data that may be driven by domestic policies or ambitions may be deemed risky in terms of economic viability after we run our models. So it's also possible indeed that there are, for example, national gas development projects expected in Germany and the Netherlands, just because it's the example highlighted here, but then that our EVA suggests that potentially this capacity might not be viable, or that other capacity somewhere else in the system is not viable, and not talking specifically of gas. So of course, it's always difficult for us to make general statements that fits all the member states and all the areas. Please always take them with a grain of salt.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, Gregoria, and all attendees. So I would use now this opportunity to finish this call with this last slide. So to conclude, we have published ERA 2024 results reports with all the annexes and input data which we use in the simulations were also published and it's available for you. You can take a look at that, and we are very eager to get your feedback on ERA 2024 assessment. You can do this until 16th of May. There is a dedicated consultation page, and you may provide your views and comments there, and we are very eager to follow up with those. Meanwhile, what is a bit ending sooner, we have launched on 1st of April a call for evidence for ERA 2025 preliminary data set, and this window for your comments with some evidences about maybe inaccurate or more accurate data being available is welcomed by 22nd of April. As well, there is a dedicated consultation page for this where you can submit your observations about the input data. In case you are missing some files, you can take a look. In a couple of days there might be a few additions may be added, but you can always shoot an email if you're missing something specifically missing to info@entso-e.eu, which I will make sure it will appear also here in the slide deck before it will be published. So with this remark, I would be happy to close now this webinar. Be reminded as well, this presentation and also the recording of today's session will be published on ENTSO-E website. Just give us some time, a day or two. Typically it takes us to make this available online, and once it will be ready, you can of course recap and even share with your colleagues if they didn't manage to join us. Said that, I would like to wish you a very pleasant day for all attendees, and also a big thank you to all the presenters, to Ralph, Aaron, Gregoria. Thank you very much for today, and I'm looking forward for the next engagements to our dear attendees today. So please have a nice day.